everyone. I am so honored to be speaking with you all today. I'm so sorry I cannot be there in person to learn, to discuss, and also to hug all of you. I really, really wanted to be there. But I'm hoping you can feel my energy through the screen. My name is Sara Lomelin. I'm the CEO of Philanthropy Together. Our mission at Philanthropy Together is to democratize and diversify philanthropy through the power of collective and collaborative giving. We envision a world full of passionate, empowered, diverse individuals giving collectively and intentionally to create the world we all want to see and share. Today, I have the honor of kicking off this session with a look around the world. A look at some of the statistics and stories that tell us where we stand today. By examining these three major questions together, we can unlock a more equal and grounded form of philanthropy globally. I'll then pass it on to two incredible colleagues that will go deeper into the landscape across the continent and then specifically in East Africa. But to start big and bold, let's dive into who is giving in our current philanthropic landscape. How are they giving and through what structures? And where is this money going? When we answer these questions, we can begin to understand that philanthropy needs the power of the people. And it's our mission at Philanthropy Together to revive that spirit of giving together. There is an Akan word and symbol from Ghana, Sankofa. Sankofa is often understood as go back and get it. It teaches us that we cannot move into the future without retrieving the wisdom of the past. Or the South African phrase, Ubuntu, I am because we are. Or practicing dana, which means generosity, giving, or charity in Buddhist tradition. Or aini, the Andean practice of reciprocity. Everything in the world is connected. And around the world, beliefs around generosity and care have always guided our cultures. We cannot start without that baseline. And that spirit is what philanthropy needs right now. Philanthropy literally means the love of humanity, but we don't always feel that love. To grow generosity and love, we must shift our frame of reference. I'll show you what I mean throughout this talk. The future of giving is not only ahead of us, it is ingrained in our cultures. It is in practices and methods that communities around the world have carried for generations. The Global South created radical forms of giving and collective care long before philanthropy, as we know it, formed. Behind me are the many ways that communities around the world have been supporting each other and giving together since the dawn of humanity. In Mexico, where I am from, we know them as tandas. And in Korea, we know them as ge. And in West Africa, we know them as susus. I'm sure so many of you here today can name countless other traditions and may have participated yourself and with your family in some of them. The practice of giving is multifaceted. It is local, it is national, it is regional, it is international. And while it is changing fast, we have millennia of beliefs, cultures, and traditions to build on. Let's never forget that. In preparing for this conversation, I reflected on a leader whose work with women and communities in Burundi and Malawi moved me. Milka and I met in 2020 over Zoom at a time when we started Philanthropy Together. During COVID-19, we were worried for how we could give and help others during worldwide pandemic. She recently wrote to me ahead of this very conference to share the following quote with you all. In moments of transition, the focus is not on searching for new anchors, but on learning to recognize and strengthen the ones that already exist within communities. I am very thankful to know Milka as a community anchor and to know that you all are anchors in this giving movement. So, okay, let's first dive into who is giving in this current philanthropic landscape. Money is moving. According to Giving Tuesday, total global annual giving amounted to $2.3 trillion with a T in 2024. The money is there and it's moving. Aggregate U.S. foundation assets alone stand at an additional $1.75 trillion as of September of 2025. But most foundations continue to give out at the very floor of what they could be given, just 5% per year, while their endowments appreciate at rates that outgrow their grant making. And we hear more and more the narrative of the concentration of wealth. And there is truth in that. This green line increasing shows the rise of giving from ultra high net wealth individuals, those with wealth of more than $30 million. They now account for 38% of all individual giving in the world. That means around 400,000 people drive more than a third of global charity. And the red downward trend is the declining participating of U.S. households giving. It has declined from 66.2 in 2000 to 49.8% by 2020. All these statistics are from Giving USA. So there is more money flowing, but from fewer and fewer individuals. According to Giving Tuesday, again, around the world, it's individuals, not institutions, who power the majority of charitable giving. This is a story that is not told enough. Individuals are who fuel the giving landscape we see today. A vast $1.5 trillion of that came directly from individuals, at 65%, through direct donations, religious offerings, informal giving, and of course, the biggest one is remittances, which alone make up $905 billion of that individual portion. Remittances are the largest channel of generosity globally, going directly to local communities and families. And yet, we often only focus on the narrative around institutions and high-capacity donors. This is a complicated picture, but there is a potential in the collective, in all of us. To complicate the view of who is given even further, look at what's happening with official development assistance. ODA dropped 23% in 2025, the largest single-year decline ever recorded. Pardon me. That wiped out a decade of progress. And the US, responsible for 3/4 of that drop. ODA is projected to keep falling through 2028. Across Europe, governments are scaling back foreign assistance budgets and redirecting resources toward defense, driven by the conflict in Ukraine. And less than 20% of first-time donors return to give again. So these are serious broken pathways in who is giving. But we also have good news. We also see an estimated $124 trillion in wealth forecasted to move between generations by 2048. And women will control nearly 40% of US wealth within 5 years. And we know women give differently, more collaboratively, more in relationship and trust. And next generation donors are joining in with all of their skills and voice, not just their wallets. They are 3 times more likely than older donors to advocate for causes that matter to them. And one big bright spot is the power of collective giving. We know people that give look different across the world, and it's why at Philanthropy Together, we're always looking at who is giving on the ground. In our latest research, we found that between 2017 and 2023, nearly 4,000 giving circles in the United States alone mobilized about 370,000 people to give more than $3.1 billion. This is local money, local people, shared decision making. As I shared at the beginning, we need to change our frame of reference and lean into what is working. When we give collectively, we mobilize people to give more, give better, and give together. We cannot discount the power of individuals in this given ecosystem. A giving circle is a powerful example of collective giving. A giving circle is simply a group of people with shared values who come together to make change. And they pool their time, their talents, and money and decide as a group where it should go. Giving circles create a sense of belonging. As people share different perspectives and create a space of discourse, giving circles are schools of democracy too. In a giving circle, the group gives with trust and with abundance. This is a part of giving circles that get them recognized as a bright spot in philanthropy. In giving circles, it's not just about money. It's about community power, proactive change, and civic action that it brings. Collective giving is about supporting grassroots organizations, building community, challenging the status quo of who gets to be called a philanthropist, acting as first funder, shifting power, and ultimately systemic change. Collective giving groups foster bonds within groups and bridges across groups. We saw this in our latest research. People get together to share ideas with like-minded individuals, but also people feel more equipped to share perspectives with people that think differently than them. And collective giving is good for your health. We saw in the research that it's good for mental health. People don't feel alone anymore. They feel less isolated. They feel part of, a community. So that was a look at who is giving. Now let's turn to the how, which has changed drastically over the last several decades as well. So private foundations used to be king. There is no single data source, but estimates point to north of 350,000 foundations that now exist all around the world. And they are normally regulated by government, classified as charities, and run by a board of directors. They have large structures, endowments, and often large staff teams. But this model is slowing down. More new wealth holders are choosing different, more nimble vehicles to facilitate their giving. And there is a growing trend of private foundations sunsetting, like the Gates Foundation sunsetting by 2045, spending down roughly $200 billion over 2 decades. Donors used to set up their private foundation and write a check to a charity. That was how funding flowed. But there has been a massive rise in intermediated giving. The layer between funders and grantees, these various groups, everything from community foundations to donor advised funds, to fiscal sponsors, international NGOs, philanthropic collaboratives, giving platforms, we now sit in the messy middle of an enormous and growing share of philanthropic dollars. These different platforms can sit entire continents away where the money flows. But there is a growing trend of locally rooted intermediaries with deep knowledge, relationships, trust, and expertise that shapes where money goes. One of the largest forms of this has been the rapid rise of donor advised funds, or DAFs. They really have taken over the landscape. DAFs is a new model where a donor contributes to their donor advised fund, receives a tax deduction for that gift that year, and then they can recommend where that money goes at any point in the future. The DAF sponsor technically holds the final decision. The simplicity of this model has meant huge growth, and now total DAF assets in 2024 stood at $326 billion, nearly doubling since just 2020. Donors recommended $65 billion in grants, almost a 20% increase over the year before. 3.5 million accounts are now active, with 2/3 of contributions being non-cash assets. That means stock, crypto, private equity, and more. While primarily this rise is being seen in the United States, DAFs moved almost 650 million pounds in the UK last year, and are growing in popularity in Europe and across Asia, especially in Singapore. More high net wealth donors are turning to DAFs as it enables them to give with more ease without the overhead. Many new wealth donors are choosing to be much leaner in their operations with just a few staff members, a DAF account, and reliance on a variety of advisors and intermediaries to facilitate their giving. And the bright spot in the how is again the collective. Where giving circles are bringing together everyday donors, philanthropic collaborative funds are bringing together institutional funders, corporate foundations, governments, and high net wealth individuals together to move money. They enable donors to access special expertise, share risk, and pursue impact at a scale most could not achieve alone. And over just the last 5 to 10 years, there are now more than 500 of these collaborative funds moving between $4 to $7 billion a year. This is the last estimate by Bridgespan. These vehicles are primed to move more dollars through them, and a majority are focused on issues of equity, are led by more diverse leadership, and are working on intersectional issues. They are giving unrestricted gifts to where it's needed most and often have their governance and strategy developed with frontline leaders. A subset of these philanthropic collaboratives are the dozens and dozens of locally led and rooted funds all across the Global South. A new study by NEAR counted 64 of these funds. Like my dear friends at the Youth Climate Justice Funds, who are supporting climate justice young leaders with trust-based funding and capacity building. So the landscape of how funds are flowing is entirely different from just 10 years ago. And if we put the how and the who together, it leads us to our final section of this talk. Where is that funding flowing? Here are the bad news. Only 2% of global human rights funding reaches grassroots organizers. Only 1% of gender equality funding globally reaches women's organizations. Only 0.03% in global foundation funding goes to LGBTQ plus causes. If these statistics were different, many of us wouldn't even be in this room tonight. Fighting to make philanthropy and the flow of funding more equitable to where that money goes is imperative. This question of where is also about the piping that connects donors from one region to another. The Global Philanthropy Environment Index charts the environment for philanthropy across almost 100 countries and economies. It tells us that cross-border philanthropic flows are facing the steepest decline. Cross-border philanthropy is the most challenging in the Middle East, North Africa region, Southeast Asia, and Latin America regions. These are the world's 3 most challenging regions for dispensing international aid. Even if the donors and dollars existed, the infrastructure to enable that flow of funding, from banking to legal to support organizations across borders, into the communities that need them most is actively declining. And again, at the risk of repeating myself, a bright spot is the collective. Prospera, a network of women's and feminist funds across the global south, conducted research that showed that in 2024, 55% of grassroots movements reported that women's and feminist funds were among their main sources of funding. As I'm nearing the end of this talk, I hope you see the trend here, the ultimate bright spot. Collective giving is about the power of what happens when we come together. I'd want you to think of what one person can do with one vision, one effort, one project. Then think about a whole group of people, a shared collective vision, our combined efforts. As I said earlier, philanthropy as its roots means love of humanity. Giving together is one of the few places where that love becomes tangible, expressed not in grand gestures, but in the ordinary, ongoing practice of deciding together what matters and acting on it. So, no matter if you're young or not that young, no matter where in the world you call home, no matter if you have $10 or 10 million to give, look at who is giving, how those dollars are flowing, or where that money is going. The bright spot our team sees across all these statistics is always collective giving. Together and only together, we can get through the uncertainty of today. No single philanthropist, not the largest grant, and no perfect silver bullet solution or vehicle will do it. It will take all of us. I want to leave you with a guiding thought shared by Milka, and one I hope you all can hold in your hearts and minds over the next few days together. The most effective systems are not always the most formal ones. They are the ones built on trust. Across East and Southern Africa, many of these systems already exist, even if they are not labeled as philanthropy. And you all know this, as Africa ranks as the world's most generous continent by percentage of people giving and by proportion of income donated. So, in my view, the future of philanthropy lives in each of the respective countries, communities, and experts here in that very room. Thank you all again. Please learn more about our work at philanthropytogether.org. Have a wonderful conference. I hope to see you all in person in the future soon. And all yours, Tendai. Thank you.
Good evening. I don't think I need any more introduction except that I'm Tendai Murisa. I am from the wonderful country we know as Zimbabwe, the House of Stones, Zimbabwe. I'm here to build upon what Sarah has just done. We're talking about the philanthropy ecosystem. My assignment is to look at Africa and what exists, what needs to be done. If the technology does not let us down today, I'll be able to cover 4 parts in my presentation. The first one is focused on naming the problem or reframing the problem for what it is. And number 2, to begin to map out what needs to be done, to ask what does philanthropy have anything to do with this, and then to get a bit deeper. I'm not a papa, but to try to get deeper into the conversation. And also then to begin to spruce up what needs to be done. The idea, the objective of this conversation is to help us come to a place whereby we set the tone for the conversations that have to happen from today onwards, and also to build upon what we have done in Zanzibar initially and then in Rwanda. So we are building upon an existing story. So I'll start off by talking about where Africa is right now, the challenges that we face as a continent. The first one being the fact that it's a dependency gap. Rather than looking at Africa as just a place whereby we are surviving in isolation, Africa is part of the global world and is dependent on global systems, but our dependency gets to a place where it is slightly worrying. Let me get into it. If today, for whatsoever reason, SWIFT was going to collapse, the payment system, what would happen is many of our organizations will probably have to close down because we cannot move money from the global north where it resides into Africa. We will not be able to travel because most of our money cannot be used to pay for trade, etc., etc. So that's one area in which we're dependent. And it speaks even to the philanthropy ecosystem itself, that philanthropy, in as much as we're trying to develop it, we are failing at the point of managing our own back-end systems that can help us to leverage resources that we claim we have on the continent. And number two, we are a dependent continent in terms of the food we eat. Africa is a place of contradiction in many ways. On one hand, Africa, I've covered this. On one hand, Africa, here's the paradox that Africa lives with. 257 million of your people face food crisis of a different nature each and every day. Yet 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land is in Africa. Then 45 billion of our money is spent importing food. 356 billion is projected to be spent this year alone. Please don't play around with me. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so our import dependence, 82% of basic food imports from outside of Africa. We're in East Africa today, the cradle of humankind, that's what I'm told Ethiopia is. 84% of East African wheat demand is met by imports. So we have not yet achieved wheat sovereignty or wheat self-sufficiency. 40% of our rice consumed by our ogas in West Africa is imported. And there is an estimation that fertilizer prices in 2026 alone will rise by 31%, thereby increasing the price of production of our agriculture, which is supposed to be the backbone of our economy. And secondly, Africa does not clothe itself. If you look at the brands that you are wearing, very few of them are African. I'm proud to say I'm wearing African today. So here's the contradiction. 15% of world's cotton fiber is produced in Africa, but only 2% is processed locally. That says a different challenge that we face. What is the contradiction? We export our cotton to Asia and Europe. They manufacture for us. They sell it back to us at a higher price. Then there's a smuggling problem. If prices of clothes are expensive, we go the other way. We circumvent our borders. We smuggle. Our countries, our governments miss out on the duties. But what is the opportunity? China and India have democratized manufacturing to an extent that if we're willing, we could have our manufacturing capacities now. Manufacturing monopolies, the technology, the know-how has been transferred and it's now affordable. It's on the open market, but we have not invested sufficiently on it. Our policy fix is mostly focused on disincentives. It is not focused on creating incentives. So there are no incentives for local value addition and production. We focus mostly on import bans. Africa must process what it grows. That's the takeaway from here. But that's not the whole story. So many people may think I'm here to condemn Africa. Now let's talk about what we are. Time to flip the narrative. This is what we are facing as a continent. The problem of illicit financial flows. It hits us hard here in Africa. If you look at how much the African Union, I'm glad I'm in Addis, the African Union is close by. They say Africa loses $88 billion per year through illicit financial flows compared to the $74 billion that we receive from ODA. Even the previous speaker spoke about reduced ODA, yet illicit financial flows are going up. That is a challenge. Then what are these drivers of illicit financial flows? Because I'm in a hurry to get to my story, I would say that 65% of the illicit financial flows we face have to do with tax evasion and corporate offenses. I kept invasion there as a typo so that my team can take note next time. 30% of IFFs are from drug trafficking and smuggling, criminal cartels that are dominating Africa, and 5% of IFFs are from corruption. So what does philanthropy have to do with everything I've been talking about? I argue that more than you would have thought. Because before I move to the next slide, I think the agenda and the assignment for philanthropy in Africa is totally different from any other continent. The agenda for philanthropy in Africa does not only sit in the social space, it also has to address economic questions of production and reproduction. But I've placed philanthropy alongside other sources of financing, what we are calling domestic resource mobilization, which is an agenda for the African Union and many African governments to say we need to increase the share of resources for development from our own, mobilized locally. And these are the 4 areas that we have identified. Number 1, improved tax collection. Africa's average tax revenue equals 16.1% of GDP. Yet in other countries, in other regions, the average is 22%. Mineral royalties, we're not doing so well here because of the race to the bottom. Every country is eager to attract FDI and they're signing lousy deals and we're not getting value for the minerals that we have. So we hold about 30% of the world's critical mineral reserves. But if you look at how much money have we made from that, it's very little. Then thirdly, pension funds. Here there's a big challenge. Most of our pension funds in the region of 2.3 trillion are in African funds that are locked overseas. Privately organized pension funds prefer to keep the monies that you save, they prefer to keep it in Europe and other tax havens, and it's not being used or released for development on the continent. But today, dear friends, I'm going to talk mostly about philanthropy, the giving from within the continent. So what does it look like? Where does continental giving come from? This is a very rich and layered ecosystem. It does not have one single actor, but it depends on collaboration. But at times we don't see the collaboration, and yet it actually is a multiple actor area. So let's just look at the rise of high net worth individuals. By 2013, the Economist magazine, which had said in 2003, Africa a hopeless continent. 2013, they were talking of Africa rising. And one of the phenomena they had noticed was the high net worth individual giving. In annual giving by wealthy Africans, and this is just a fraction of the potential of what 195,000 African millionaires could do. It's sitting at 2.8 billion. I believe there's more we could do if there were enough incentives, etc., to increase this to close to 10 billion. And also we're beginning to see an increase in giving by corporates. CSR and corporate foundations are expanding across, but we see most of the activities in the big 5 markets, that is South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, Morocco. These anchor 90% plus of billionaire wealth. These are the markets where billionaires are rising at a very fast pace. And so corporate CSR in Africa is significant, but the challenge is it's uneven because of the uneven development of the capitalist sector and also the uneven development of the policy sector in terms of regulation and offering incentives. To date, there are only 2 countries with robust incentives for corporate giving, that is South Africa and Mauritius. Informal giving. This is everyday giving through families, communities, and religious networks. This is the bedrock of who we are. Sarah talked about Ubuntu, Arambes, etc. This is who we are. But it is deeply underreported. We rarely talk about this, the everyday giving, the gifts that we give as common people to each other. Yet the 2025 World Giving Report says Africans donated 1.54%, but this is reported giving. Half the time this goes without giving. Many people who are in religious organizations, they give a tenth of their income through what the Christians call their a tithe. In the Muslim world, we got zakat, etc. So I would argue, given the number of religious people that we have in Africa, it is most likely going to be 1.54 if we're to capture the data properly. So, and 72% of those who gave, they gave money to causes. There's a difference between giving money to a family and give to your extended family and to causes, where causes, these are causes that are affecting people who are otherwise strangers to you, but you feel like you need to give. Then community giving. In South Africa, they have a phenomenon called stokvels. Then burial societies, I believe they're all over, rotating credit clubs, susus, harambes, etc. This is the invisible infrastructure of African solidarity. In South Africa alone, stokvels, you have injected more than 50 billion rands, or 2.7 billion a year. And historically, harambes have contributed a lot in terms of development, even of infrastructure. I'm not so sure if my 55 million stands. I see Professor Jacob Martin shaking his head. He believes it's more. Then, but 86% of Kenyans donated money in 2024. Key stats on giving by high net worth individuals. Let's just drill down around what the rich are doing on the continent. So there's been a 4.1% annual HNWI growth. That is the growth of the high net worth individuals. Then they've been given 2.8 billion, like I've already mentioned. But we expect that these will grow by 42% by 2032. Because all the growth that we're talking about Africa is driven by an entrepreneurial energy. And as they're accumulating, we're hoping that some of that will translate into giving. 56% of our net worth individuals are just in those 5 markets that I made reference to earlier. This being a challenge, because if they're only in 5 countries when we're with 54 African countries, what about the other countries? Because we're yet to see high net worth individuals giving across borders. There are borders, despite the fact that many of them have got Pan-African businesses. When it comes to their giving, they go back to their villages. So it's about how do we transform to make sure that in as much as they are Pan-African, they're operating across multiple jurisdictions in terms of making profits, they could also consider their giving to expand to that extent. Then, is the infrastructure fit for purpose? This is the question for the day. So we've talked about all these different elements, the multi-layered ecosystem, etc. So they are the visible forms, the corporate foundations. These are mostly Safaricom, Econet, major Delta Corporation. In South Africa, we've got SA breweries, etc. The banks, Nedbank, Old Mutual, etc. Establishing corporate foundations. Then we have corporate foundations established by high net worth individuals. At times there's a coincidence between high net worth individuals and the corporates they establish. And we're seeing immense wealth. It's an immense wealth base. USD 2.5 trillion. This is growing, and the population is growing. So we expect that this is going to grow by 65% in the next 10 years. And also the strength about high net worth giving by locals, it has huge cultural legitimacy. It has high capital. It is trusted, it is respected, and it is well received. Then community foundations. The infrastructure is people-centered and resilient, but most of the times under-recognized. We go into many communities, all we see are challenges, and we don't understand how communities are mobilizing resources and have set up networks and institutions that are responsible for mobilizing, pulling together funds. Yeah? Then there are intermediary foundations. This is a growing movement of organizations that sit in the middle between the Global North institutions and African organizations. The theory or the argument being, there was an argument that was made years ago, and it's still being made, that there are very few organizations in Africa that have the appetite or the capacity to receive grants of $2 million plus. So the intervention was to say, let's set up intermediaries. And these intermediaries can receive large pockets of funds and over time begin to break it into smaller pockets to suit the capacities of our nonprofits. But over time, even those nonprofits have grown in terms of capacities. And they distribute smaller grants from global funders across the continent. What is overlooked? This is where the story is around African philanthropy. This is what we have overlooked. Individual giving. According to EPIC Africa, 55% of the organizations that they surveyed received some form of financial support from individuals. These are NGOs that are spread across the continent. Local savings groups, I've mentioned Stockfells already, then burial societies and rotating credit clubs in Nigeria alone, they are pulling together close to 2 million every month, every round. So $3,000 and $12,000 per cycle. And when you aggregate this nationally and annually, the flows reach hundreds of millions annually. Then ephemeral once-off gifts in response to Cyclone Idai, in response to a challenge, etc. We see this growing. 65% of organizations receive direct donations from individuals. That's number one. But communities have offered support to each other as we begin to see the increase in shocks to do with livelihoods and shocks to do with flooding, etc. The first responders that we are seeing in terms of philanthropy are normally neighboring communities offering solidarity to one another. And this is something that we usually miss because we don't record it well. Religious community philanthropy In 2024 alone, Africans donated an average of 1.5% of their income, much of it driven by, as I've said, tithes, zakat, and other faith-based contributions. So this is the ecosystem of philanthropy as it looks. I don't want to bamboozle you, but I'll just walk you through it. I think the first part that is very necessary for us when we're talking about growing the ecosystem is actually the ease of doing philanthropy environment. The extent to which we make it easy for corporate foundations, for individuals, based wherever they are, on the continent or outside the continent, to give. What are the issues we consider? Policies. To what extent are our policies amenable to the movement of money across borders within countries? Because in many instances, countries are coming up with measures that actually ask so many questions to an extent that people end up not giving. In Tanzania, any gift above 10,000 United States dollars has to be reported. Same in Botswana, any small grant that is given has to be reported based on the Societies Act. So our policies, the extent to which the policies promote philanthropy or inhibit is very necessary to consider in terms of looking at the ease of doing philanthropy environment. And the incentives, why should you give? Why should I give? Because all those figures that are reported by Giving Tuesday in America is because giving is tied to a tax incentive. But we don't have that yet across Africa. Then also awards. We don't recognize our givers. We don't celebrate them as much as we should. So the feminist movement to celebrate the different sort of individual donors that have come to give them, etc. But at times we miss out on the community leaders that have been sustaining communities or sustaining feminist agendas in those communities. Then we also face challenges to do with currency stability. It's very difficult for corporates and even givers to plan their giving annually, given the sort of shocks that happen to our currencies. Then also the ease of registration. Many countries are coming up with different measures now around how to register your giving platform, your giving organization, etc. So all these issues, if they are not addressed, it's difficult for us to begin to speak of a healthy ecosystem of giving. Then the second set of actors is you guys, the direct philanthropy actors, the institutions that help us with research and understanding philanthropy, the institutions that help to amplify the importance of philanthropy, high net worth individuals, community foundations, corporate partners, and even grassroots-based organizations. And on the other side is the work that Evans and Co. are doing, the philanthropy support organizations that bring us together here to have conversations and to sharpen each other, to identify best practice and replicate it and grow it. So we need to have more research and knowledge around philanthropy because everywhere we go, there's a challenge with data when it comes to African giving. So it is very necessary. Training centers to train the next set of givers, to train the next set of leaders that are going to be working in these institutions. Information channels. Despite all we've been doing for the past 10 years, we're celebrating 10 years of the EAPC. We don't have an African magazine on philanthropy. We may have a journal by Jacob Center, but we don't have a magazine that is accessible to everybody. So how are we telling our story if we don't even just have a magazine? So these are the issues that we need to be considering. Then the international philanthropy actors, I call them the scaffold that we stand upon. So whenever you're building your house, you need a scaffold, right? To go up so that you get to window level up above to do everything. But the challenge in Africa is we've made the scaffold to be permanent. Our dependence on international philanthropy actors has not appreciated the fact that they're coming for a time to help you build your own house. So we live in our houses with scaffolds surrounding us. That was meant to be a joke. Part 3, state of the sector. So the state of the sector is the context that we're facing is ODA collapse. There's no doubt about it. Sarah has already spoken to this. There's a huge funding crisis, shrinking space. So what do we do? So this, I don't want just to harp on figures, but just to be a bit very serious about. So when we're talking about official development assistance collapsing, it's not only for our sector or the nonprofit sector, even our governments. Our governments were major recipients of this money. But now if it has collapsed, that means that there's more pressure on taxes or on corporate giving. So governments are also coming to demand of resources that were meant for the philanthropy sector and local organizations. And we've already heard that the driver of this decline is these 5 powers. Germany, USA, UK, Japan, and France. Looks like they called each other on the phones and said, let's stop giving. Let's reduce ODA, because they are accountable for 95% of the decline that we have seen in ODA. So we project that in 2026 alone, there's going to be a further 6% reduction in ODA. Then of all this, the direct impact is that 38.3% of our African NGOs have already lost support. And there's risk that more will be in this bracket very soon. So this is just to dramatize the figures, to say when we try to flip the story, this is the story that we should tell. That yes, there is a drop in ODA. We get that. But there's also something that Africans are doing. Africans who are in the diaspora. If we look at our remittances, from 2019 all the way to 2024, Africans have been sending more money than official development agencies. Africans in the diaspora. So the real issue is to say, what are we doing with this money? This is where the game plan is around saying, of what share of these resources are not just going to our grandmothers, to our mothers, to our direct families, but what of this amount can be directed towards philanthropy and other important causes across the continent? So, state of the philanthropy sector. Let's break it down, because if we just give figures, we may miss the real impact that we're dealing with. So this support loss that we're talking about, 38% of African NGOs lost USAID support. And what did it lead to? Organizational sustainability has been severely affected. Many are now operating on tight budgets with very limited liquidity. Program disruption, this is big. Life-saving services, food, water, shelter, medical care are collapsing, especially in rural conflict areas. I don't even want to tell the story of what is happening in the Sudan, in DR Congo, the challenges with collapsing funding. Funding gap, most of the NGOs that are reliant on USAID yet become single donor dependent. And with closure of USAID, many organizations are challenged. They are critically vulnerable. There have been staff layoffs. Quite a number of organizations have laid off staff, people have lost jobs, etc. And local capacity strain. Local NGOs that have been working on the coalface, on the front lines of change, cannot absorb the funding gap, and risk permanent closure. So we've just started to record organizations that are closing down. It is worrying that for the first time, we have more organizations closing down than organizations being established across the continent. So what does the data mean for Africa? I make this bold claim that the aid era is ending. And it is by design. So this is not something that is just happening by itself to say, oh, they just fell down or if just fell sick. It is by design. Official development aid has declined by 23.1% just in 1 year. And we've already mentioned that. This is not a cycle, it is a structural shift. Africa cannot plan around aid anymore, for it may not arrive. We have to really rethink, because we no longer have that assurance to say we have a 5-year program that is being funded by USAID. That is and we have noticed and we have learned that there's a precedent has been established that organizations can be told to stop what they're doing even when they're in the field. For those of you in the field, leave the cars there and leave. So we can no longer plan and design multi-year programs based on official development aid or just on aid. So what do the remittances tell us? They signal where the real resources are. Yeah, but the challenge is, how do we structure it into proper investment, not just for consumption? Most of the remittances that we've seen are being used to sustain and support families. But how do we take that game plan to the next level? How do we make sure that we're using remittances to fund local clinics where our grandmothers are anyway? Because it's one thing for you to send money for your grandmother to go to the clinic, but if she gets there, there are no medicines. But what if we started to really organize through these giving circles that we had from Sarah? So domestic philanthropy is the underestimated pillar. We really need to build upon this and see what we can do in terms of moving forward. What is missing again is the infrastructure, incentives, and the institutional will to mobilize it. So we have to rethink the future. The future is going to be about moving from traditional NGO to building social enterprises. And these social enterprises should have the capacity to mobilize resources from within. They should not be dependent upon aid as traditional NGOs have been. They should also be resilient and embedded within communities. So the final game plan is to say, how do we take it from here? This is what we need to be doing. We need to see it. We need to count the giving that goes unmeasured. We need to connect it, build the infrastructure that amplifies it. We need to enable it, create the policy environment that rewards it. So during the course of the next 3 days, we're talking about seeing it, we're talking about connecting it, and enabling it. I thank you.